Mark. It's really nice to meet you, and I hope you're
Nice
doing
to
great.
meet you too. It's an honor to be here. I know that my
Yeah.
daughter did a couple of these as well, wrote a couple of articles. And so I love your organization. I love what you're doing, and very impressive work and very impressive interviewees that many of you have had so far, like presidents and people like that. So I feel like I'm honored to be here.
So, Mark Schulman is a rock star and a world class drummer who has played with bands such as Foreigner, Simple Minds, Cher, and most recently, Pink. He is also a session drummer, music producer, audio engineer, and has a drum clinic. Thank you for being here, Mark.
One of the primary things I do is I'm a professional speaker. And I actually I'm doing that more than anything else these days, virtually, of course, because that's how we're doing it. But that's a very important part of how I communicate and what I give back to the world in addition to playing drums.
How are you and your family doing during this pandemic?
Thank you for asking. We're doing quite well, actually. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and I think she's been struggling sometimes because she hasn't been able to see her friends. So we've worked out some special social distancing with certain friends that we trust, that we have both made agreements about how we sort of keep our own social distancing the rest of our life to keep everything safe. And right now she's surfing, so she's taking surfing lessons as she takes martial arts. They do the martial arts out in the parking lot of the martial arts without doing any direct contact. And I have just taken it on to completely evolve my business. So rather than shutting down and resist it, I mean, it's a big change. And there are really two ways we deal with change. We either embrace change or resist change. So when you embrace change, you start to see new opportunities and you welcome new opportunities, and your mindset is very different. Whereas when you resist change, you tend to get anxious and fearful. So at first I was resisting the change because, as I said, I'm a motivational, I call it activational speaker for a lot of big corporations. And I thought, oh, I could never do what I do because I actually play drums and it's very interactive and it's very high energy. And then I woke up one morning and said, why am I resisting the change, and why am I making excuses and telling myself stories about why I can't do stuff rather than getting proactive? So we had just literally built an annex to our house, this huge room. I got the big green screen, I got cameras, we got lights, and I just literally created a way to make my presentation interactive, make it new and unique. And now I fully embrace the changes that I've needed to make as a result of COVID. I call COVID the new frontier.
I read that you started off playing classical cello, but like what made you switch to drumming? You went from classical to like pure rock. How did you transition?
Well, here's how the story goes. When I was about 3 years old, I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, right? And I saw John and Paul and George, and I was just transfixed. I couldn't stop watching. Then I saw Ringo, and something inside of me exploded. I saw his big, beautiful nose and the swishing of the drums and the cymbals. Then I saw the screaming girls, and I was like, that's what I want. I said, Mama, I want to play drums. And she said, no. Can't you play a nice instrument, a quiet instrument? Your brother Randy plays violin. Can't you play something like violin? So I used to go to my older brother's violin lessons that were taught by my godfather, my Uncle Ben, and I saw something in the corner that looked like a big violin. I thought it was cool, and it was a cello. So I started studying cello. And at the end of every cello lesson, my Uncle Ben would give me a little drum lesson. And at 5 years old, I sat at a drum set and I could play. I just knew what to do intuitively. So I say that drums chose me. I didn't choose drums. So I continued to play cello, but at 9 years old, my parents couldn't deny my passion any longer. They got me my first drum set. So I started playing in bands when I was 9 and started playing professionally when I was 13 and kept on playing cello, then finally stopped playing cello in high school. But I always had the skill because I'd worked up. I played it for so many years. I played in the LA Junior Philharmonic. I'm not going to say I was that great at cello because I wasn't. But the interesting thing is, when we did the Pink Funhouse tour, there was a song, I wasn't playing drums, and Eva, who's a dear friend of Michelle's, was playing stand-up bass on a song, and then we had a violinist, Jessie Green, who's a dear friend. She was playing violin on the tour, and I kind of volunteered to the musical director and to Pink. I said, I play cello. And I kept on sort of saying that and saying that. And it turned out that I whipped the cello out, hadn't played it for God knows how many years, practiced for 2 weeks straight. It was a very simple cello part, and ended up playing cello on the Pink tour, on the Funhouse tour, because we played a string, sort of a string trio, not even a string quartet. And that's my story with cello. When I got off the road, my daughter was only 2, so I kept on practicing cello, and every time I practiced cello, she would cry. So I stopped playing. Daddy, no!
Practicing your instrument is always an important part in any young musician's life. How did you deal with practicing at a young age, and what advice do you give to the next generation of musicians?
First of all, when I practice, I have short-term goals, meaning the daily goal. What do I want to accomplish that day? Say I'm practicing a snare drum piece on drums, and I can play it at 60 beats per minute, but I want to be able to play it at 90 beats per minute by the end of the day. So that also answers the second question that many students have: how long should I practice? My answer is as long as you need to achieve the results you want to have, and make the long-term goals very big and very bold, and make the short-term goals very specific, because there are specific things that you need to accomplish. I think it's critical that everybody have a teacher that you really respect, because I tell students, listen to everything your teacher says. I know a lot of people go, wow, that's crazy, but I want you to listen to everything they say. And if you find something that doesn't apply to you, disregard it. But the more you listen, the less you resist. Remember about resisting versus embracing? The more you embrace what other people give you, the more you will learn. Which leads me to another concept, which is listen to every kind of music you can possibly listen to. I may not be a fan of all styles of music, but I listen to all styles of music, because the more I listen, the more I learn.
Can you tell us the hardest drum beat or song that you had to learn? Because I saw in an interview you were talking about The Black Page by Frank Zappa.
That's it.
So I'm curious.
That was the Mount Everest. Learning the Black Page when I was about 22 years old, because Frank Zappa writes some of the most complex rhythms of any composer of any time period. He drew a lot of his influences from Bartok, but for any of the drummers that understand complexity, he uses odd phrases and then compound odd phrases, meaning he might take, instead of most things are in 2 or in 4 or in 8, he may take groupings of 5 and then nest those groupings of 5 inside groupings of 3 or inside groupings of 7. And it took an enormous amount of concentration. So to me, that was the ultimate learning experience. And I actually learned it with a bass player that was playing melodies along with it. This guy was so brilliant, so he inspired me. So I think that was by far the most challenging thing that I ever learned. I couldn't play it now to save my life. I'd have to sit down and practice it again for another 2 weeks to a month to be able to play it again.
I've seen that you've played with so many famous musicians and incredible, just skilled people. When you play with them, do you write your own drum parts, or do you play parts that other people write for you, or both?
It depends on whether I've played on the record or not. Most of the artists that I played with, I am sort of evolving existing drum parts, we'll say. Pink is a great example. I haven't really played on any of the records because nearly all of the drum parts are programmed drum parts. So they're kind of the same beat over and over. Most of them are not very evolved necessarily. So what we do as a band is we take her studio production. We have all of the individual tracks that come in on what we call the Pro Tools setup, which is the electronic setup. We have an engineer that runs just the Pro Tools, and we start eliminating all of the tracks that we play. And then we evolve them. So I don't just, when I hear a drum pattern that's just like, you take a song like Sober is a great example. It's literally the same drum pattern over and over. But I evolve it. I play something that I play a very similar pattern, but then we grow it. And Justin, the guitar player, adds these very dynamic guitar parts that may not be in the original. What About Us has basically the drum part is. So when we first learned it, the manager said, learn it just like the record, because she said she wants stuff more like the record this time. So we learned it just like the record. And everybody played these very stock parts. And she came in, and we also created our own evolved parts where Justin would play some very crunchy guitar. I went into this whole really heavy tom part that I created for the chorus that really built it. So we played the original stock version, and she said, "Oh, cool." And I stood up because I'm the bold one, and I said, we have another version we created, obviously, that's very evolved, that we, created more musical dynamics, and we played that part. And she was like, "Yes, that's it." So that's the answer to the question. Now, for Simple Minds or some of the Billy Idol stuff, I play it on the record. So therefore, I'm emulating a lot of my own parts, except when I'm playing songs that I hadn't played before. Same thing with Foreigner. There was some original music that I had played with Foreigner, so I'm playing my own parts. But I even evolved my own parts a bit.
I hear that tours can be really exhausting. So how do you keep your energy consistent throughout the tours?
Oh, I love touring. And to me, it's not exhausting. To me, I actually get so much work done because I love to get work done. I wrote my first book on tour. I was out with Foreigner and a little bit with Pink. I remember sitting under the Eiffel Tower with my iPad writing. I wake up in the morning and I have a schedule. I think that it can be exhausting. I think it's important that you get enough rest, but I think we have so much time off. The reality is we usually travel after the show by bus. We get in early in the morning. I make sure I get enough sleep. I go back to bed. I have a morning routine, and then I do some work, and then we go to the gig, we sound check, and then we have a big chunk of time off. I may take a nap, and I will definitely do some more work. If my family's out with me, I spend some time with my family. But it's a matter of trying to get into as much of a schedule and pattern as you can.
How has having different toms set yourself apart from your fellow drummers? And why did you choose to use them and have a different number of toms, like up to 3?
Everything I use is depending upon the gig that I'm doing. When I played with Stevie Nicks, I used a 5-piece kit. With Cher, I originally started using the big kit because with Cher, I was trying to emulate the Hal Blaine tom fills from the 70s for some of her stuff, and Hal Blaine had 8 toms. So my general setup has been 12, 14, 16, 18. My basic setup is just a 12 and a 16. And in my studio, I use 12, 16, or I'm sorry, 10, 12, 16, and then sometimes an 18. But then I started realizing that I could have more color in my playing. Then I added an 8. And the reason why I added an 8 was to emulate the Hal Blaine fills. And now I love the 8 because it's got a little accent, but I use it, it's 10, 12, 8, 16, 18, and I use a 14 to the left because I use that when I'm playing my left-handed snare, my snare drum on the left to help with tom fills there. So I utilize the toms based on the music and what the music calls for, and also to add a little bit of extra color.
So you've probably performed all around the world, and so do you prefer playing small venues or stadiums?
I love both. I mean, I've had some of the greatest experiences playing small clubs to intimate audiences that were going crazy and we just connected. I think the balance is important. With Pink, we played, 100,000. We played for 100,000 people at Rock in Rio. With Simple Minds, I played for 225,000 people at the Glastonbury Festival. That was a rush and a high. We also play these small club gigs with Pink in between where there's 300 people, and we love it because when you're used to playing the large venues, then you play the small venues, you love the combination of everything. So I think it really is a hybrid of both. But I will say, generally speaking, playing outdoor stadiums is a big rush. I won't lie. It's just, stupendous.
I have a follow-up to that. Do you notice a cultural difference in audiences between Latin America or Asia or American or Europe?
Absolutely. Well, the Asian audiences, because I played with some very big Japanese artists, very different. They are completely quiet between songs,
Wow.
but then they go crazy when they scream and they yell. But whereas the American and the Western audiences, Western Europe and Eastern Europe, they're just loud all the time. You also have a lot of people dressing like Pink and these adoring fans, and the Pink fans have these big signs and they all want to tell her stuff because she identifies and she reads the signs and announces to people, and she signs people's arms, and she lies down on the stage and takes photos, and she's so committed. She's the most committed artist I've ever not only worked with but experienced.
Is it hard to concentrate on your playing with all of the pyrotechnics and lights and all that going around?
For me, every single note I play matters, and I attach a sense of purpose and passion to every single note, so I have more and more fun. So I am incredibly focused and incredibly present for what I'm doing at the time. And I just use all the fuel and all the energy. I own it to take it in to help me perform even better.
Okay, but were you in Berlin when she fell from the ceiling? And my second question is, what is it like to play with a musician like Pink, whose performances have so many stunts?
She didn't fall from the ceiling. You're talking about when they had the accident when she was doing the we call it the 360 during So What, when she wasn't clipped in on one side.
Okay.
Yes, I was there. I've been with Pink for 14 years. That was frightening, the most frightening experience I've ever witnessed in my life. I literally thought she was dead. And she's insane. She crawled back on the stage. Her husband, Carrie, had run down into the pit when he had seen what happened, and she had Carrie help lift her back onto the stage with one song left so she could get on the stage, and she looked like she had broken her leg. She was leaning on Carrie, and she apologized to the audience and told them that she felt so bad. She had one song left. She couldn't perform that one song. She was too injured, and she offered to give everybody their money back. But that's Pink. She's superhuman. So yes, I was there. It was pretty profound, but she handled it with so much grace. And the day and a half late, or the next day we had a day off and she was resting. And the following day, she was not only back on doing, we were back doing So What, she was not only back up doing the 360, but to this day, it's the greatest show closer in the history of mankind.
What was your favorite concert that you ever did?
Playing Wembley Stadium with Pink was one of the great favorites. Playing Rock in Rio with Pink was one of the great favorites. My first gig with Richard Marx, because it was like Beatlemania, because it was all screaming girls that were so loud we could barely hear ourselves. It felt like Beatlemania. We played a club. There was 600 people. That was astounding. Playing Glastonbury with Simple Minds, it was crazy. You couldn't see the end of the audience. It was rolling hills. So not being able to see the end of the audience is wild and profound. It's 250,000 people, 225,000 people to be more specific.
To me, you have had just a very diverse and interesting career with drumming, and your style is really interesting. Just you can span from like Brazilian dance to me into like jazz, into funk, into rock and pop like Pink. How did drumming for Pink affect your style and the way you look at writing music?
Songwriting has affected my style as far as writing music, because I listen and analyze song structure. I studied harmony when I was younger. I pay attention to lyric structure. I work with other writers that are more advanced writers than me. And drumming affected, when I started producing, that affected the way I play drums in songs. Because I used to, when I was a kid, I would play too much, a lot of chops. And after I started producing, I realized those chops were getting in the way of the music. So getting into producing and engineering and understanding the total picture of what everybody's doing together really helped my drumming, because it took me out of being focused on the drumming only and being drumming centric to being music centric and song centric.
Which tour would you say was the biggest or the craziest one for you to do?
Well, the biggest tour was Pink's last tour. It was a sold-out stadium tour in Europe, 30 to 100,000 people per night. The month of July, she was the highest grossing artist in pop music history. And these shows were selling out in 15, 20 minutes. So these were adoring, pure Pink fans, huge everywhere. So I think that has been the pinnacle, I would say.
How has being a session and live performer changed the way you think about drumming, and just how has it helped you adapt?
Well, it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of different people that look at studio drumming and live drumming differently. I really don't. I want to create, when I'm in the studio, I like to think about getting to 100,000 people. I think big. I think not necessarily big as far as the drumming. I think big as far as my energy. I want my energy to come through, and I want it to have a profound influence on the music. About the only difference might be is sometimes live, I might play a little bit more or take a few more liberties, whereas in the studio, I may be a little more conservative. But generally, I play the way I play. And that's why you hire Mark Schulman, because you get my style, my energy, the choices that I make with the beats that I create and the grooves that I create, the sound that I choose, the snare drum I choose, the way I tune my toms, the way that I set up my mics. I'm really big into studio recording. I did a video called A Day in the Recording Studio, a drummer's guide to recording drums, a musician's guide to recording drums, because it's for all musicians. It's available on Hudson Music. And why I love that video is I did it myself and then sold it to them. So it's really funny. It's really cheeky. It has an enormous amount of information, but it talks about everything from approaching parts to tuning, to miking, to signal processing, to working with producers. And you can download it on Hudson Music. I think it's only $10. So if anybody wants to know more, because I apply that same philosophy to my live performing. My charting, I have my own charting technique, which is a very fast charting technique. So I can chart out songs and not have to look at the chart that much and be more engaged in the music without reading a chart solidly.
Who is your biggest inspiration?
As a drummer, my biggest live influence is Vinnie Colaiuta. I just think Vinnie is otherworldly. He's my favorite, and I know him well. He's also a Gretchen Dorsey. My favorite drummer who's passed is Buddy Rich, because Buddy is still to this day the greatest soloist. But I will tell you, I love Ringo. I love Abe Laboriel Jr., Greg Bissonette, Thomas Lang. Antonio Sanchez is a dear friend of mine, one of the most brilliant drummers. Miles Davis. Stevie Wonder's my favorite songwriter. Paul McCartney is one of my great influences. I got a chance to meet him and spend some time with him. So, and then I love amazing and graceful thinkers. Everybody from Elon Musk. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I think he's a brilliant thinker, and he's a great storyteller. I was a big fan of Wayne Dyer. Big fan of Tom Bilyeu, who has this show on YouTube called Impact Theory. If you want to hear some of the greatest thinkers, listen to Tom. I'll go on because I'm a big fan. I just love to learn.
So I know we're all waiting for quarantine to end. So after quarantine ends, what's next?
What's next for me is I had 18 speaking gigs all over the world, corporate speaking gigs in the month of March and April that were all postponed. A couple of them canceled. So I'm waiting to get back out on the road and do what I do with the speaking, and waiting to get back on the road and play with Pink. Right. The immediate goal is the speaking, because that's what I was intending to do this year, because Pink's taking the year off. So, and I want to get my book finished this year on the power of attitude, spend an enormous amount of time with my family. We love to travel. We miss traveling. So we'll get back into traveling and continue to activate people the best I can.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It was such a pleasure to have you.
Thanks so much. Take care. We'll talk soon.
Okay, bye.
Hi, Mark.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye, thank you.